Hi everybody, and welcome to our Excel video on how to make a histogram. So what I have already done here in Excel is I've already input some basic data. So, and again, I just made this all up, so it's not real data or anything like that. But I already started to create a frequency table to start. So I figured out my classes and I already counted up my frequencies for my data points. What I've also done here is I've created the class midpoints. Remember, we create the class midpoints by finding the average between the lower and upper limits. So for instance, I did 16 plus 20, added them together and divided by 2 to get the 18. And then 21 plus 25, and then divided by 2 to get the 23, and so on. You'll notice here that my class width is 5, excuse me. If I go down any column here, I can see it's changing by 5s. Also here with the lower limits by 5s, and here with the midpoints even by 5s. So that class width is consistent all the way down. The other thing I've done here as well is I've input our class boundary points. So remember, your boundary points are a little bit above and below each class. So in this case, because we're using whole numbers, the halfway point between classes always have a 0.5. So for instance, halfway from 20 to 21 is 20.5. And that's where this 20.5 came from. And then halfway from 25 to 26 is 25.5. And that's where this 25.5 came from. You can also find those by averaging them. So if you add 20 to 21 and then divide by 2, you would get 20.5. Again, if you add 25 to 26 and then divide by 2, you would get 25.5. So I basically did that all the way down. For your first and last boundary point, you do want to follow the pattern. So for all my patterns, I've been just adding a half to the upper limits. So my final boundary point here would be 45.5, following that same pattern. And then if you look on the way down as well, again, everything is sort of subtracted by a half, right? 41 is 40.5, 36 is 35.5, and so on. So I follow that same pattern to get my first class boundary point of 15.5. So I've done this work already ahead of time. And for me, I just did it by hand. I just used a basic calculator and figured out these values. Now, if you're really tech savvy and you know Excel, you could do a lot of this calculation in Excel and use formulas. So we definitely have average formulas in here. You can create your own formulas as well. So you're welcome to do that. This class is not an Excel spreadsheet class. We're going to use Excel to help us, but we're not going to go through every little detail. So for the basic setup here, this is a pretty quick frequency table to create. I just used a basic calculator and found some averages. Now, my goal in the video is to show you how to make a histogram, and I'm going to show you two different ways. There's more than that as well. So if you know a different way to make a histogram in Excel, you're more than welcome to use it. I'm going to show you two strategies that you can use, and you're welcome to use either one. When we create histograms, your x-axis has to use either your class midpoints or it has to use the class boundary points. In a histogram, because the bars are touching, we do not use the classes for our x-axis labels. It has to either be the midpoints, signifying the middle of the bars, or the boundary points, which allows us to have those bars touching. So you could choose one or the other. They're both considered correct. All right, so let me show you two different ways that you can do it. Let's say you want to go with the class midpoints as your x-axis labels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my class midpoints. I'm going to hold down my control key so I can also select a second column of frequency. If you're finding you're having trouble with that, you can always just redo your frequency table and put the midpoints next to frequency, right? And then you can select the columns just together, which is fine as well. Here I have them separated, so I'm going to select one column, hold down control, and then select the other column so that they both highlight. I'm going to go up here to insert. I typically go to recommended charts, and then I'm just going to select a regular bar chart to start, and I'll show you how to edit it. Okay. And you'll see here that, you have your heights. So if you look at your frequency heights, this one is 2, 5, 8, 9, 4, and 1. So the heights look good. And my labels on the x-axis are those class midpoints, 18, 23, 28, 33, 38, 34, etc. Now, by clicking this plus button here, you actually can change. You can add in, if I click here, I can add in axes titles. And you can go ahead and change those. So I would maybe want to change this title. I'm just clicking the box and it will allow me to edit it and call this maybe class uh, midpoints. And over here as well, again, I can click into here and edit this. And I don't really have any meaning behind this. So I'm just going to call it frequency or something like that. And I can also change my title. And again, I'm just clicking these text boxes that are already created and changing my title this way. All right, sorry about the pause. You probably heard my dog start barking. Hopefully he'll stop. And then I do have to edit a few things here, right? So you may notice and say, well, your bars aren't touching, Professor Paul. How are we going to fix that? So one thing I do like to personally do first, and then you can go ahead and you can play around with color a lot more if you really want to. But up top, they'll kind of give you options to change the colors and things right away. So if you want to go ahead and kind of play around and change the color scheme, you can do that. I also like to pick bars that have borders already done for me. It's a little bit easier. If you look on the right here, you can go ahead and format your histogram. So if you click this paint tool, that will again give you more style options and things like that. And you can edit, your chart more and kind of play around here as well. For me, I like to try to keep it simple if I can. So here, if I bump out of it, I'm just going to go back up to chart design. And then again, I like to pick ones that already have a border. It makes it a little bit easier to read. And then I'm going to go over here to quick layout, and I'm going to change my layout to this one that looks like a histogram. And now I'm done. So I select my class midpoints, I select my frequency, I inserted a basic, let's find it again. I didn't do a histogram, I inserted a basic bar chart. So basic column chart here. Put that in, and then I was able to just play around with the different styles and options like that and make a nice histogram. So that's one way you can do it. Another way you can do it, so with a slightly different strategy, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this one. And again, you guys can play around more at home with, just clicking to the text boxes, changing your titles. The other thing you can do too is you can resize this. So you can just pull this if you want to make it a little bit bigger, or if you want to make it smaller. You can see how my axes will compress as well as I make it bigger or smaller. If you go here to the plus sign, you can add in different things. If you want to add in grid lines, you can add grid lines in. If you want to give a legend, if we need a legend, if it's more complicated, we can do that. Or if you need to put in a table, you can do that as well. I like the data labels. It puts those little frequency counts up top, so I can maybe add in my data labels in grid lines if I would find that helpful. So you have some choice in how you want to edit that. All right, so let's say you don't want to do the class midpoint. So if you're doing the midpoints, this would be the strategy I would use for you. I think it's one of the fastest ways to make a histogram. If you're not using the midpoints and you really want to use your boundary points, what I would do first is I would select that column and I would copy it. And I'm going to just bring it over here so I can place it right next to my frequency column. And again, I'm going to select this, I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to go ahead and paste it here. I'm just using Control C for copy and Control V for paste like you would in Word. If you're having trouble though, let me just click out of this for a second. If you select and then you right click on your mouse pad and things like that, you could also have some additional options here as well. So you can see copy is right here. You can also format your cells and again, go into a lot more detail if you need to. Another nice little trick is I do like to see my whole column. So if you click that spot right here, double click right in between. Oh, now it's not going to work. There we go. It will expand that column for you so that you can read all the words. You can also do it manually and move it yourself if you want and find that helpful. All right, so to go ahead and use my class boundary points, again, I'm going to select my data. And I'm going to do it differently this time. I'm going to go in, I'm going to go here and select the one that actually looks like a histogram and start that way. And you're going to see that it looks really weird. So what I'm going to do is I go up here to the plus sign. I'm going to have my axes. And again, you can play around. I can add in some axes titles. I really like titles. You really should have titles on things. I like the grid lines. I'm going to leave the grid lines. If you want the data labels, you can add those in and so on. But over on axes, you're going to go to the right, click that arrow, and then you're going to select more axes options. And you'll notice that you see a category that says bins. Bins are basically classes, but Excel calls them bins instead. So they're doing it automatically here, and Excel really does not do a great job doing them automatically. You can see they're really weird looking. They just don't make sense. So if you're using the class boundary points, you can select by category, and now you see that it's fixed. So you have those class boundary points already at the bottom. Your frequencies are correct. And again, I do like to add in those titles and stuff. So, down here, it's just a text box. I could go in here and I could, just write something like class boundary points. I can change this one over here again to frequency and so on. So that's another quick way that you can make your histogram. One way I will say it is it works much better if you have them next to each other. I could not get it to work when they were in separate columns. I don't know why. It could just be me having some trouble on my end. But I would have them next to each other. The other thing too is using the strategy. It did not work well with the midpoints. I kept just not getting, I wasn't getting the right columns. So I think it works better if you have some sort of range here of values and it interprets it better. So this strategy works really nice for boundary points, whereas I think the other strategy works better for class midpoints. But they're both great and they're both correct ways that you can do it.